Hello, and welcome to the next episode of StatBid's e-commerce workshop series. I'm Roy with StatBid, and with us today is Hussain, who has been a partner of StatBid's for many, many years. I've been saying that this series is an opportunity for us to chat with folks who know more about specific things than we do. Well, I'm a former web developer, and StatBid has been relying on Hussain's company to do web development related tasks, especially in our case, Google Analytics implementations and tag debugging in GTM. So for sort of scale of that kind of relationship, those are things that I could theoretically do myself, and I'm much better off relying on a specialist provider like Hussain's team. But Hussain, why don't you introduce yourself, and then we'll dive into the presentation shortly.
Awesome. Thanks, Roy. Yeah, so it's been amazing to, kind of work with practitioners that know, development as well. So yeah, my background is primarily in digital analytics. I started as a PPC analyst trying to kind of optimize ad campaigns and realized that I was much better at, giving companies that, the data that they could use to actually optimize it themselves and sort of dive, deep into digital analytics since then. And yeah, I've been kind of riding that wave since, ever since.
Excellent. Well, I really appreciate you joining us today, and we'll be getting into a topic that has been obviously on everyone's radar, whether or not all that many of us have drilled into the specifics of the implications yet. So with that, I love the term you've coined for this, the Adoclapyse. but yeah, everything from Google foreshadowing a cookieless future. It all sounds like the sky is falling. So I really appreciate you covering the topic for us, and feel free to jump right in.
Awesome. Right. Thanks, Roy. Yeah, so I think this has been a very frequent topic to come up with, and hasn't been helped by the fact that last year the world was actually ending. So I think it's been top of mind for a lot of people. On my side, this is something that we've been dealing with for a while in terms of just thinking about how to organize and collect data in the right fashion so that we're not really heavily reliant on any ad platforms. So yeah, I'd love to kind of just talk through it, and would love to kind of see what you guys are seeing on the ground as well. So yeah, so I think probably for those in the US might have sort of seen this ad on New York Times. Facebook's been really concerned about what is going to happen, if some of the changes that Apple has been kind of doing and is continuing to do, come into place. So the good news is that those changes did go live. The sky has not fallen yet. We are seeing some impact of those changes, but that we'll kind of dive into.
We have been having some intermittent connectivity issues.
At least the last years. Oh, sorry. So let me know if I can, kill my video, or you can kind of pause it if needed.
Yep, your audio caught up though. So
yeah. So all right, no worries. Yeah. So I think eventually that that idea of like that legislation really started with Cambridge Analytica, and how Trump was using data for personalizing a lot of messaging, right? And then that resulted in legal folks kind of taking action without sort of realizing the longer term implications of it. And this has now sort of snowballed into what we see right now. So our ecosystem, as it stands right now, looks something like this. There's privacy related legislation covers almost like 1/4 of the human population right now in terms of like some sort of a data or data privacy legislation that has been put out. People have also, of course, used it for more sinister means. For some authoritarian regimes have like found ways of bending it to their will. But the end result of this is there's a lot of interest and focus on how data gets used online, and where does that data becomes available. The principle of which I think you guys would be probably dealing with would be GDPR, CCPA, which is in effect in California, and the Canadian law, which is also becoming like kind of a central focus these days. So yeah, so I think GDPR, if you look at it, is probably the starting point of all of those things. And what has happened as a result of this is that most technology vendors have sort of become gatekeepers, and they've taken it on as their own responsibility to actually try and maintain these standards throughout the world. So of course, as like nuances, and it's been introduced with seeing net result of this is a lot of people have a lot of confusion around what that information means, and then to be on the safe side, everyone sort of just implemented the standard structure everywhere. There's And if we look at this, we've had like a very active slew of updates throughout the last couple of years, with browser privacy becoming increasingly different from the world that we're used to. So there were like some changes that are going to be a bit more permanent from 2020 as a result of this. We are seeing limited number of days where a cookie is available. We're seeing impact on how much data we can capture. What information becomes available when someone converts. And so this is like sort of the major list of those changes. I don't think we need to run through each of them, together. But in effect, what this really means is that you have a lot of different browsers, controlling how much information you would get, and this has, resulted in sort of a chain reaction throughout that entire ad marketing chain, where everyone's trying to catch up or try to figure out ways to work around the limitations. I think in the long run, that's a losing battle, because I also feel that from a sentiment perspective, consumers also feel that they have a right to more privacy, right? So I think one of the things that we advise our clients is that we should think about a future where none of this is possible, or think about like an Armageddon scenario where we can't do any of those things that you're used to with ad marketing. What happens next? So I think there's definitely something, but those implications are something that we should start thinking about. So at a summary, this is the state of how browsers are reacting to most changes. So you have Firefox, which is deleting any cookies after 1 day if the person is coming from ad platforms. So one of the reasons, and this is like their severest setting. So they have like a mode called privacy set mode, which effectively means that as soon as you close your browser, it deletes your cookies, and then in most typical fashion, they're deleting it after 1 day. Safari, in most cases, deletes cookies after 7 days, but if they detect that you've come from Facebook, or if you're coming from a Google ad link, and you have, let's say, a GCL ID in your URL, then the cookie gets deleted after 2 days. And this applies to like all the cookies that would be set, by the deletes all the cookies. And Chrome, of course, like slightly behind on these things, but they've also limited the data that they send by default. So if you were to click on a link somewhere and come to your website, you would typically see the full URL of where that person might have clicked on the link. But right now, this is no longer the case, and you just see the domain name. So these are all like escalations that have sort of built up over the last couple of years, and now they're coming to fore. And the most kind of recent impact down, where and this is one of the main reasons like Facebook kind of put out that advertisement as well. iOS is asking everyone to opt in to sharing their data, which results in, of course, like a lot of people not accepting the opt-in, because we know how much we enjoy pop-ups in general, right? So that's something that has caused a lot of kind of concern among ad marketeers, because they use a lot of that data for understanding intent of users and trying to classify them in audiences. And this is something that kind of applies to lookalike audiences, especially because a lot of your targeting is based on the fact of what that user did in other places. Right now, we have about 14% of traffic, that has really accepted that prompt. So there's definitely a large impact as a result of this change. Cool. So what happens as a result of this, right? So all of those things are technical, have an impact, but at the end of it, this is like the major implication of all of those things combined. One of the major things is that in our digital world, we rely on cookies pretty heavily to do a lot of attribution. We also use them to understand where a person might have come from, or to be able to credit a certain traffic source. So think of a very common scenario where someone comes to your website and they ponder a few product choices, do not commit, and then eventually go away. You're likely to show them some ad to kind of bring them back. Of course, someone that has already done some action on your website is likely a warmer lead than someone who has not. In the current scenario, Facebook would struggle to actually show them the ad again, because in most cases, Firefox and Safari would have likely deleted their cookies after 2 days, so the person cannot really be matched back with the original data set. This also kind of impacts attribution, because if you can't really know where that person came from, you can't really attribute them to a conversion as well, right? So this has like sort of this cascading effect throughout that value chain of being able to attribute conversions. And this is, I think, something that is going to continue. So we have to be sort of mentally prepared for workarounds or kind of strategies that like help us minimize some of that impact. Cool. One of the things that we've learned from that process is that if Facebook is not able to kind of in behalf, that does not mean that you cannot. You can still be intent about targeting, but it the onus really falls on you, as the marketeer, as the business owner, to really understand your audience much better to be able to kind of do the targeting. So imagine what used to happen in the past. You used to send a lot of intent data back to Facebook or other ad platforms, and they would using kind of their own algorithms and using the data from all over their network, figure out who's a better fit, right? Now that they don't really have the ability to join those data sets connection, or not being able to kind of connect those dots, you have to kind of think on your own and kind of figure out what is possible, and how might you kind of identify the right person to target. Cool. So yeah, so that's all doom and gloom, but let's talk about what we can do about these challenges. I think with all of these challenges, it always comes with opportunity. Really, one of the main opportunities with this is that it has increased the the need of understanding the ecosystem much better, right? And those that are able to do that, or those that are already doing it, are going to have less noise in the ecosystem, and be able to kind of reach better audiences as a result. So yeah, so there's like some technical implications, but I think that's definitely par for the course. One of the main things, again, to kind of remind you of, is what started this whole thing was that people and their data is being used in ways that they did not agree to, right? So one of the main expectations right now is that you have explicit informed consent. So any of these strategies that you try.
I'm sure he'll be back in just a moment. So as I can take this beat to mention that we are taking live questions. So if you're watching along with the live audience right now, feel free to drop questions into the YouTube comments, and we will get to as many of those as we can, assuming Hussain is able to rejoin us here in a moment.
Cool. Sorry, guys. Did I?
You're back. Perfect.
Can you guys hear me now?
Yep.
Okay, perfect. All right. So I was just thinking about consent, and yeah, just about the only warning I was going to give, and I kind of dropped out. So yeah, so just please make sure that your users agree to whatever communication you're going to do with them, and especially kind of becoming more important these days. Cool. And now let's dive into some of the fun stuff, right? One of the main things to kind of think about is, how do you leverage the data that you already have and the data you own for doing some of this analysis, right? So I'm sure you guys all likely use some level of analytics platform, things like Google Analytics and other things for collecting data. One of the challenges with that data has been that it's generally been relatively siloed and not really deeply connected with the with other data sets that you might have. So one of the longer term bets that you guys can make, and this is with some and this has like simpler starting points as well, is start with things like Google Analytics or if you're using Segment, use kind of integrations that they already have for sending data into warehouses. So warehouses are effectively databases that let you store raw data, and using kind of that data, you can then build more kind of specialized targeting criteria of that data set. So as an example, this could be, sorry, right? You were
I was going to bring up Shiloh's question, since he was asking about Google Analytics 4 in particular. Can you speak a bit about GA4 and how urgent is it that we get GA4 running alongside our existing Google Analytics instance so we can start collecting data prior to the switch? So obviously we see it coming, but is it important or valuable to get it spun up sooner so you can compare the two systems, or is this something that is going to be difficult to compare anyway?
Yeah.
We'll get you an answer, Shiloh.
In parallel, but I would not say that it's like the most crucial thing, to kind of do. The main benefit of having it in parallel is that effectively, Google is committed to kind of, killing the older version, right? Which means that eventually, you need to kind of migrate to it, and having it sort of in place would mean that you have some, historic data already to kind of start with, and being able to kind of do some of that analysis. I'm sure Google is thinking of some ways of making the data comparable between the different systems, but by default, right now it lives in two different environments. So the more data you have in one place, the faster it would be for you to kind of migrate to that new platform.
Got it.
Cool. Yeah, and then sort of the side benefit to it, at least in the short term, is that you can actually put that data into something like BigQuery, which is a very cheap, an inexpensive way of storing your behavior data in one place. The benefit of this is that over the long run, what we expect is that you would need to bring in data from other platforms into the same place to be really able to do any sort of meaningful segmentation. So I think this is something that is over time going to become crucial, because as you have a higher lockdown on the data that you can send from the browser, that really kind of means that you need to find other places where you can organize that data and send it to different systems as needed. So in the long term, what we imagine the scenario would be is that you have different sources of data where your ad platforms are also an input and an output. And then you're able to kind of pick and choose the segments that you want to activate and push that into the right channel. So you can send that data into your ad platform, your email platform, or a combination of them, depending on where that user fits. And being able to do that at scale would really mean that we have some system of organizing that information. So yeah, so this is and to be honest, you do not really need to worry about all the sources right now. If I look at sort of our slate of clients, there's a very small percentage that have implemented all of them, but you can still get some value out of it if you were just kind of combining, let's say, your analytics data with your email marketing data or with your ad platform data, and you can level up over time as needed. One of the other things that it enables is the fact that you can also do smarter things like look at returns and shipping and other things as to calculate the total cost of conversion, but also to figure out who's the right audience to target, right? Because if you have high conversions from a channel but maybe a lot of returns as well, this makes it really easy to actually look at those data sets side by side and and tune your audiences. The other side to this is that once you have that data, you need to figure out a way to send this information into platforms as well to be able to activate it. Google has released a new platform called Google Tag Manager Server Side, which is meant to like offload some of the work that was done by the browser onto your server. The main kind of benefit of this is that you have more control over what information can be sent. So it is very explicit about what information you're able to send, and of course that means that you also are responsible for what information you're sending, much more than previously. And at the same time, if you have another data source or a database, you can communicate in parallel and find that right information before it's sent along to Facebook or other ad platforms. So I think in the long run, this is going to be a very common paradigm where you have not a lot of pixels being loaded on the website, but a lot more work being done by your server. This is also something that Facebook is really pushing right now, because it does give them some additional data that was not possible before. So one of the ways that Facebook and Shopify already actually has an integration for this, for doing this automatically. What you're able to really do is that you're able to do a hybrid approach where you can send information.
Hopefully he is able to come back here. But effectively, what he's getting at is that the
browser
pixel
information for the server would be things like
I think you're back. All right, we were just getting to the nuts and bolts of the hybrid approach.
Yep, exactly. So yeah, so with the hybrid approach, the benefit is that you'll have a lot of information from the browser, but you can sort of enrich that information from data that would not typically be available on the browser. So those two things sort of combined, would have the net effect of having a much richer kind of ecosystem. And yeah, right now, with provided. So I would encourage anyone that's already kind of working with the platform to consider. Cool. Yeah. So I think just to kind of wrap up, at a super high level, I think we're sort of going back to an era where some of the old school kind of marketing techniques are going to become more in vogue. Gone are the days of leaving the data to ad platform thinking. I think there's like definitely going to be, in the long run, other platforms are trying to figure out ways around it, but in the long run, I think the platform is the technology platform is really going to win out, because that's where most of the innovation is happening, and they're like really focused on figuring it out.
Yeah, cool. There are.
And yeah, so yeah, to just like sort of summarize.
Sorry, we're just out of sync.
And yeah, that's like everything. If you have any questions, please shoot.
So I did have one question for you, and then I believe we have another one from one of the team. But the scary headlines, at least circling around Google's announcements, keep using the term cookieless. But for those of us who know a little bit about how e-commerce platforms work, we've always assumed that there was a big difference between first-party cookies, the things that lets Shopify know that you have this cart, and third-party cookies like Facebook's tracker or Google Ads tracker are handled differently. Just looking at the headlines, that same distinction isn't being included as much. Can you speak to whether or not there are going to be impacts on some of those more infrastructural cookies as well, or is this purely a third-party cookie thing?
Yeah, so I think that's definitely a major distinction that is getting lost in the headlines. The focus really primarily is on third-party cookies or first-party cookies that are being set by the browser. So when we talk about, let's say, server side, we could actually set first-party cookies that do not expire with some of these limits that different browsers have put forward, because those are cookies that I would set from the server. And same with like things like Shopify. They are I'm not sure if they are already, but they can really easily kind of move their cookies related to kind of infrastructure to the to the server side, and not see like a very large impact as a result of it.
Yeah, because all they would really need is an ID in that cookie that says, this browser belongs to this server-side record, correct? Okay,
Yep,
got it.
exactly.
We do have Jarrett's question. What are the requirements to implement server-side tracking? Are there challenges depending on your platform? And is the fidelity comparable to the early days cookie tracking, or is it better?
Yeah, so I think right now the major cloud infrastructure that it sits on. So there's a cost to running server side because it is, in effect, running a server, and that cost kind of increases with the volume of traffic. So there's an implication there. Other than that, the other kind of major kind of, I would say, bottleneck would be that this is like really primitive. There's no built-in tags or templates. You have to sort of write code and test things and validate. So it's probably a much longer process. I believe that over time that is going to change. Because this sort of reminds me of the initial versions of Google Tag Manager. When it came out, it was like very primitive as well. In terms of the kind of data that is available, I think that does not really change because in either kind of you can still write the same amount of data, and with server side you can still put that data in the right context. The challenge really is that in most cases it is not for the data is not really for the consumption of the website itself. It is for the consumption of a third party, right? So in that context, it requires some work from the ad vendors themselves to figure out how to kind of adjust to this new reality, right? And in most cases, what Facebook conversion API is trying to do is precursor for what other platforms are going to end up doing as well, wherein they're going to give you a hybrid approach where you send some of the intent data from the front end, and then anything related to hard conversions like sales from the back end.
Yeah, I imagine that this is going to create a sort of micro industry around connecting those bits of data together, because in the same way that server side data was something that you could do 6, 7, 8 years ago, not many people did because there wasn't that much incremental value and there was a large technical demand in order to get it implemented. But we were able to do incredible things with it. Folks who are familiar with my background, attribution was something that we had built a pretty robust server side solution for. But a lot of those features were then somewhat replaced by new features added to Google Analytics over those same years, and so it was a technical challenge that yielded big results, because the big players hadn't upped their game yet. So it feels a little bit like that same kind of Wild West kind of sprint now, where I expect that people who have a little bit of experience working with marketing databases, people who already have experience with BigQuery, which you have to think a little bit differently to work with BigQuery than say MySQL or something like that. It's a different kind of structure, but that learning curve becomes a competitive advantage because it's going to take years for all of the implications to shake out, and it's going to take years for somebody to be able to start putting together some generalized solutions that might work in more than one instance. But for now, we're probably looking, at least from my perspective, at a couple of years worth of bespoke custom deployments based on individual use cases. Do you see a faster path to standardization, or do you see this as being sort of a prolonged period of experimentation, more like I do?
Yeah, I think it really depends. I would imagine that given the fact that there's sort of three parties involved in it, right? It has like the interest of ad platforms as well, right? To build something that is simpler to integrate and kind of use. I imagine that as a result of this, this would be a faster path to versus something that was because, for example, like Google Analytics, sort of went on its own kind of schedule to build features out. And here there's like very kind of serious kind of time pressure because there's another party that is actively trying to minimize the impact. So yeah, I do expect that it will still take like a few years to shake out, but I think we will see more kind of innovation faster than we would have seen otherwise.
Yeah, and I think this is a good example of where a marketer with a little bit of technical experience can achieve amazing things compared to their non-technical colleagues. So I'm biased as a former web developer turned marketer, but if I could give anyone some advice, having a little bit of experience directly interacting with a database or better yet a marketing data warehouse is going to be a skill set that is more differentiating compared to other marketers in the next couple of years, in the same way that it had been in, say, 2012, 2013, when the last round of big changes were coming to the market. All right, that's the rest of the questions that we had queued up. So I wanted to thank you, Hussain, for joining us. And I appreciate the patience of the audience who stuck through the connection issues. But we are going to post the deck in the description of the video here as well. And then obviously both Hussain and I are available for any other questions you might have on LinkedIn. We make ourselves intentionally easy to find there. But thanks again, Hussain, and I hope everyone has a great day.